Matthew, Mark, and Luke were written less than 30 years after the resurrection. Mark is probably first, a collection of stories about Jesus. Very little instruction, very little teaching, just a straightforward smattering of a Jesus who heals. No nativity scene, no angelic announcement of his birth. Jesus comes out almost wild-eyed. Mark's the book of immediacy. Immediately. I think the word pops up 38 times in 16 chapters. Jesus is on the move. He's fast. Then the church settles down. Of course, that's the first story. The first guy that witnesses the scene is going to talk the fastest. Give it a couple decades and you relax a little bit. And Matthew begins to write his gospel. And Matthew's focused. He's got Mark's stuff over here and he uses it. Mark's stuff gets integrated into Matthew, but Matthew's focused. He's worried about Israel. His book is straight up to Israel. So much to Israel, he opens with a genealogy because he wants to make sure she realizes who she put on the cross. And he writes to Israel directly, succinctly, powerfully. He gives prophetic statements about Israel and her future doom, how Jerusalem needs to watch out. All of these things he says are going to happen in your generation. He's talking to his audience sternly. In that book, you needed Jesus with a few more sermons, not just miracles. Let's slow down and let him talk a little bit. And then Luke, a physician. He's the better speaker. He's the better writer. And his stories are rich and they're full. His chapters, although we broke them up, but his stories are long. That's why his chapters are long, because his stories go on and on and on. And he tells stuff nobody had wrote down before. And he gives some parables that have been floating through the church ethos for about 3 decades. And Luke starts to write them down. And Luke's message is about Jesus the man and Luke gives his genealogy because he wants to prove that not only is he a son of God, he's a son of David. He's a real guy with real flesh and blood. And he's like you and me, and he takes him down into wildernesses, and he shows him as an anointed man of God. And then silence. John's gospel doesn't come to us until closer to the end of the first century, decades after the resurrection. Not only decades after the resurrection, decades after the fall of the temple in Jerusalem, where sacrificial Judaism ended. Have you ever thought about, why don't Jews still slaughter lambs? They can't. They don't have a temple. The book of Deuteronomy says they have to slaughter the lambs where God told them to. Once the temple came down, there was nowhere left to slaughter lambs. Temple Judaism turned into rabbinical Judaism in AD 70. After the temple's gone, now they just have rabbis. They don't have a bloodshed sacrifice. And so decades later, John sets down to write a gospel. We're on the other side of the fall of Judaism. John doesn't give you an Olivet discourse. John doesn't give you any end-time events. John doesn't prophesy about the last days. John just tells you about a Jesus whom he sees as a brand new creation. How's he open his book? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Why does that sound a whole lot like in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth? Because John did that on purpose. Because we're on the other side of the fall of a temple. We're in a new world. There's a new man on the earth. He's a resurrected man named Jesus. And John works his book. 50% of John's book is the last 7 days of Jesus' life. Because he wants to focus you on a crucified, resurrected, ascended Jesus. For John, he's taking you past the old covenant and into the new covenant. For John, he doesn't bother to deal with what's the best under an old system. He excludes the stories of people walking up to Jesus going, what's the greatest commandment? For John, we're done looking back into the Old Testament to find out how we're supposed to treat God. For John, we look into a new world for how we're supposed to treat God. For John, we go past Sinai and we go all the way into a new Jerusalem. It's why when John writes the book of Revelation, his book ends with a new Jerusalem, with healing in its leaves and a river that flows out of people's hearts, and all you got to do is consume a new tree and you get to live forever at the end of Revelation. In Genesis, you eat the wrong tree, you die. In Revelation, you eat the right tree and you live. That's John's gospel. That's John going, welcome to a new world. Why would I talk to you about a commandment you can't keep? So I sat in that service that day and I heard the rumbles of that crowd go, love the Lord your God with all your heart. Love your neighbor as yourself. And I knew I was hearing a Matthew, Mark, and Luke version of the greatest commandment. But I wasn't hearing a John version. Because John heard Jesus say something else. John chapter 13. In John chapter 13, verse 31, when he had gone out, Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man is glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and he's going to glorify him immediately. Little children, I shall be with you a little while longer. You'll seek me. And as I said to the Jews, where I'm going, you cannot come. So now I say to you, a new commandment I give you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another." Did you catch the adjective? A new commandment I give you. I'm not going to talk to you about a Deuteronomy 6 commandment. I'm not going to talk to you about a Leviticus 19 commandment, but I'm going to keep the heartbeat of it. I'm just going to flip it around. Instead of me commanding you to love God and go love your neighbor, I'm here to give you a brand new commandment, one you've never heard before. It's why you use the word new. One Moses didn't hear, one Matthew, Mark, and Luke didn't write down because they were writing before, while there was still a temple sacrificial system. And here comes John with nothing left but Jesus in a new world. And he goes, you want to know what Jesus wants you to know in a new world? He wants you to know a new commandment. If you're living in a new world, you need a new commandment. And what is it? You need to love people the way you're loved. That's a new animal. The Old Testament, love God and then love people. The New Testament, love people to the equivalency that you know you're loved. If you're struggling to love people, I have new information for you. It may be because loving people is really hard. It's so hard, it's in the old covenant. But in a new covenant, you love people because you know you are loved. Whereas the old covenant didn't focus you on how loved you are, it focused you on how much you are to love. The new covenant focuses you on how loved you are so that you know how to love. It's not that under the new covenant we don't love people. It's that we don't love people independently as if loving them gets us something with God. We love people dependent on our own revelation that we are a loved people. So if I don't know God loves me, how in the world can I expect to love you? Especially if you're the neighbor I can't stand. Because that's the one that's the hardest to love anyway. It's easy to love the guy I can stand, but let's insert the guy I can't stand. Let's insert the guy whose religion or race or politics or thought processes are the exact opposite of me. Let's insert the guy that I think is the reason we're all in trouble. Let's insert the woman that I disagree vehemently with, that I think that their opinion is of the devil. Let's insert that one. How do I learn to love them? Well, you just try really hard. Won't work. Because you can't love anybody the way that you love yourself. And God knew you couldn't do it.